In my last video, I talked about how the fifth trumpet in Revelation chapter 9 symbolized the rise and progress of Islam. In this video, I'm going to be talking about how the sixth trumpet relates to Islam, because both the fifth and sixth trumpets in Revelation are about Islam. But before I do that, I want to thank God's Last Warning for sponsoring this video. God's Last Warning is a Christian YouTube channel dedicated to producing inspiring videos which are sure to increase your faith in God. I highly recommend watching their video entitled Daniel Unsealed 2, History's Response to Daniel 7. This is a very powerful, prophetic outline of history from the Babylonian Empire to the end time. Here's a clip of the video.
Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of the heavens strove upon the great sea. And four great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another. The first was like a lion, and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made stand upon the feet as a man. And the man's heart was given to him. And behold another beast, a second, like to a bear. And it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly. And it had great iron teeth, devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes, like the eyes of man, and a mouth, speaking great things.
Click on the card in the upper right-hand corner of the screen or the link in the video description to subscribe to God's Last Warning and watch Daniel Unsealed 2 today. Before I continue on to the sixth trumpet, I'd like to do a quick recap of the fifth trumpet. In the fifth trumpet, the Prophet Muhammad is symbolized by a star falling from heaven, which is given a key to the bottomless pit. The bottomless pit represents the Arabian desert. That's where Muhammad's followers arose. Smoke comes out of the bottomless pit, which symbolizes the errors and false teachings of Islam, which obscure the gospel. And Arab Muslims are symbolized by locusts and scorpions, animals that are both indigenous to the Arabian desert. The fifth trumpet mentions a time when a king would rule over them. The first king to rule over the Arab Muslims was Osman I, founder of the Ottoman Empire. The Arab Muslims were to torment their enemies for 5 prophetic months, which is equivalent to 150 literal years. This corresponds to the time from which Osman I began to reign in 1299 AD, to the subjugation of the Byzantine Empire in 1449 AD. And that's pretty much where the fifth trumpet closes. The sixth trumpet is a continuation of the fifth trumpet and gives some additional details. By the way, before continuing, it would be a good idea to watch my video about the fifth trumpet if you haven't already, because some of the things I'm going to be talking about in this video will make a lot more sense. Click on the card in the upper right-hand corner of the screen or the link in the video description to watch it. Starting in Revelation chapter 9 verse 13, it says, Then the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar which is before God. There was an earthly sanctuary which later became a temple where the Jews worshipped God in Old Testament times. It contained 3 compartments and several articles of furniture, including the altar of incense in the holy place. But what Revelation chapter 9 verse 13 is talking about is not the earthly sanctuary, because after 70 AD, the Jewish temple was destroyed and temple services came to an end. Therefore, it's talking about the heavenly sanctuary. The Bible makes a distinction between the earthly and heavenly sanctuary. For example, in speaking about Jesus, Hebrews chapter 8 verse 2 calls him a minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle which the Lord erected and not man. So there is a sanctuary which the Lord erected and a sanctuary which man erected. The sanctuary that man erected is the earthly sanctuary, which only served as a copy of the heavenly sanctuary. In speaking about the service of the priests in the earthly sanctuary, Hebrews chapter 8 verse 5 says, "Who serve the copy and shadow of the heavenly things, as Moses was divinely instructed when he was about to make the tabernacle. For he said, 'See that you make all things according to the pattern shown you on the mountain.'" This reveals that when Moses was on top of Mount Sinai for 40 days, he received blueprints for the earthly sanctuary, which were based on the heavenly sanctuary. Also, Revelation chapter 9 verse 13, in mentioning the altar of burnt incense, which is in the holy place, gives us a reference point in time. Jesus moved from the holy place in the heavenly sanctuary to the most holy place in 1844 to begin his work of investigative judgment. This is based on the 2300-day prophecy in Daniel chapter 8 verse 14. Now, I'm not going to explain the 2300-day prophecy and investigative judgment in this video because it would take too long. But if you'd like an explanation about that, then please watch my video about the investigative judgment by clicking on the card in the upper right-hand corner of the screen or the link in the video description. But anyway, since the fifth trumpet ends with the subjugation of the Byzantine Empire by the Ottomans in 1449, and in Revelation chapter 9 verse 13, our attention is directed towards the altar of burnt incense in the holy place of the heavenly sanctuary, that means that Revelation chapter 9 verse 13 had to have taken place sometime between 1449 and 1844. Revelation chapter 9 verse 14 states, saying to the sixth angel who had the trumpet, "Release the 4 angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates." 4 angels in the Bible are used to keep destructive powers in check. For example, Revelation chapter 7 talks about 4 angels being used to hold back the winds of strife until the 144,000 are sealed. Then the 7 last plagues will be poured out. This is going to be a global event, but the 4 angels holding back the river Euphrates is a localized event. The Euphrates River is symbolic. Revelation chapter 17 verse 15 tells us, "The waters which you saw, where the harlot sits, are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues." In other words, water symbolizes people in prophecy. Some web pages that I came across claim that Euphrates is translated from a word that means to gush forth or break forth. So the 4 angels not being able to restrain the river Euphrates any longer illustrates a flood of people, most likely an army, which is a destroying, invading power. Revelation chapter 9 verse 15 states, "So the 4 angels who had been prepared for the hour and day and month and year were released to kill a third of mankind." In my video about the 5th trumpet, I talked about how Muslims were given power to hurt, but not to kill. An agency comes on the scene now, which is given power to kill a third of mankind. The third of mankind here is in reference to the government of the Byzantine Empire. How that worked is the Ottomans didn't kill all the inhabitants of the Byzantine Empire, but they did destroy its government. The hour, day, month, and year it's talking about here is symbolic. And if you use the day for a year prophetic principle to calculate that time, it comes out to 391 years and 15 days. This corresponds to the reign of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was founded on July the 27th, 1299 AD, when Osman I led his army to invade Nicomedia, a Byzantine city. 391 years and 15 days later, on August the 11th, 1840, the Ottoman Empire lost its sovereignty to England, Russia, Prussia, and Austria. At that time, the Ottoman Empire accepted the guarantee of these four European powers to protect it against Egypt, which wanted to overthrow the Ottoman Empire. Now, the Ottoman Empire did continue to exist until 1922, but after August the 11th, 1840, it was no longer a sovereign nation. Revelation chapter 9 verse 16 says, "Now the number of the army of the horsemen was 200 million. I heard the number of them." The horsemen are obviously a reference to the Ottomans who rode into battle on horseback. The number 200 million is probably not meant to be taken literally because that's pretty much an impossible number of horseback riders. It's probably just more of a metaphor to mean an innumerable number of horseback riders. And this is a fitting description of the Ottomans as they rode into battle against the Byzantine Empire. Revelation chapter 9 verse 17 tells us, "And thus I saw the horses in the vision. Those who sat on them had breastplates of fiery red, hyacinth blue, and sulfur yellow. And the heads of the horses were like the heads of lions, and out of their mouths came fire, smoke, and brimstone." The colors of red, blue, and yellow were principal colors of Ottoman soldiers. It says the heads of their horses were like heads of lions to illustrate the ferocious manner in which the Ottomans attacked their enemies. And the fire, smoke, and brimstone that came out of their mouths is a fitting description of gunfire. Some Ottoman soldiers used muskets in battle. And to the Apostle John, who never seen a musket, when the weapons were discharged on horseback in vision, it must have looked like fire, smoke, and brimstone coming out of their mouths. Revelation chapter 9 verse 18 says, "By these three plagues a third of mankind was killed, by the fire and the smoke and the brimstone which came out of their mouths." Fire, smoke, and brimstone illustrate gunpowder and firearms. And as I already mentioned, the third of mankind killed refers to the Byzantine government. In 1453 AD, the Ottomans overthrew the Byzantine Empire, and one thing that helped them accomplish this was the use of cannons. The Ottomans pounded the walls of the city of Constantinople with cannon fire, and after the walls were breached, they invaded the city and overcame it. One online post I read stated that about 5,000 shots were fired from Ottoman cannons and over 55,000 pounds of gunpowder was used in the conflict. Revelation chapter 9 verse 19 says, "For their power is in their mouth and in their tails. For their tails are like serpents, having heads, and with them they do harm." Power in their mouth represents the military strength of the Ottomans, which included firearms and cannons. And here it says their tails are like serpents, whereas before, in the fifth trumpet, it said they had tails like scorpions. We learned in my last video about the fifth trumpet that the tail symbolizes a lying prophet, which is in reference to the prophet Muhammad. A serpent symbolizes the devil in the Bible. Revelation chapter 12 verse 9 says, "So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him." And the way that Satan operates is by deception, like when he misled Eve in the Garden of Eden. So Satan inspired the false prophet Muhammad to deceive the Saracens and Ottomans with the lies of the Quran, which motivated them to attack infidels. Revelation chapter 9 verses 20 through 21 tells us, "But the rest of mankind, who were not killed by these plagues, did not repent of the works of their hands, that they should not worship demons and idols of gold, silver, brass, stone, and wood, which can neither see, nor hear, nor walk. And they did not repent of their murders, or their sorceries, or their sexual immorality, or their thefts." The rest of mankind it's talking about here is the remainder of the Byzantine Empire. You know, the Western Roman Empire fell in 476 AD, and the Byzantine Empire, which is also known as the Eastern Roman Empire, fell in 1453 AD, and that was the two physical divisions of the Roman Empire. But even though the physical Roman Empire had now completely fallen, the spiritual part of the empire in the form of the Roman Catholic Church remained. And when it talks about the rest of mankind who were not killed and did not repent of their demon worship and their idolatry, murders, sexual immorality, and so on, that's in reference to the Roman Catholic Church. And this is kind of a repetition of Revelation chapter 9 verse 4, when it talks about the locusts being commanded to hurt those who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. I talked about that in my video about the fifth trumpet. The Roman Catholic Church is guilty of idolatry in the form of praying to the cross and statues and images of Mary and the saints. The second commandment strictly forbids this. Idolatry is also called demon worship in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 verse 20. In terms of murder, the Catholic Church has killed millions of Bible-believing Christians throughout history in the form of various persecutions, crusades, and inquisitions. And in terms of sexual immorality, just recently a story in the news reported that as many as 216,000 children were victims of abuse by clergy in the French Catholic Church since 1950. Check out my Christian t-shirt store for a variety of inspiring Christian t-shirts like my new No Jesus, No Peace shirt, my Sabbath Keeper Because God Said Remember shirt, and my No Matter Who is President, Jesus is King shirt. These shirts come in a variety of styles, sizes, and colors, and they could be a good conversation starter to help you share your faith. Not to mention, I'm having a sale for a limited time. If you enter the promo code BFB10 at checkout, you will get a 10% discount on your purchase. And this applies to your entire order, so now is a good time to stock up on a few t-shirts, hoodies, or whatever to increase your savings. Click on the card in the upper right-hand corner of the screen or the link in the video description to visit my store and order some Christian t-shirts today. The sixth trumpet continues where the fifth trumpet left off and talks about Islam in its second stage of existence under the Ottoman Empire. The time period for the sixth trumpet is between 1449 and 1844. It describes, in symbolic terms, the destruction of the Byzantine Empire by the Ottoman Turks. All of this happened as a judgment against the Catholic Church in Eastern Rome. Unfortunately, the Catholic Church refused to repent and is full of corruption to this day. The Bible actually has a lot to say about the Roman Catholic Church. And if you'd like to learn more about the Catholic Church and Bible prophecy, click on the screen and watch my video entitled 10 Facts About Babylon the Great, Babylon's True Identity Exposed.